14. It was the last day, and he knew it. The sky was an ugly, bruised purple, weirdly lit from above with the fingers of dawn. Allie moved out like a wraith, lighting lamps, tending corn fritters that sputtered in the skillet. He had loved her hard after she had told him what he had needed to know, and she had sensed the coming end, and had given more than she had ever given, and she had given it with desperation against the coming of dawn, given it with the tireless energy of 16. But she was pale this morning, on the brink of menopause again. She served him without a word. He ate rapidly, chewing, swallowing, chasing each bite with hot coffee. Allie went to the batwings and stood staring out at the morning, at the silent battalions of slow-moving clouds. "It's going to be dust-up today." "I'm not surprised." "Are you ever?" she asked ironically, and turned to watch him get his hat. He clamped it on his head and brushed past her. "Sometimes," he told her. He only saw her once more alive. 15. By the time he reached Sylvia Pittston's shack, the wind had died utterly, and the whole world seemed to wait. He had been in the desert country long enough to know that the larger the lull, the harder the blow when it finally came. A queer, flat light hung over everything. There was a large wooden cross nailed to the door of the place, which was leaning and tired. He rapped and waited. No answer. He rapped again. No answer. He drew back and kicked in the door with one hard shot of his right boot. A small bolt on the inside ripped free. The door banged against a haphazardly planked wall and scared the rats into skittering flight. Sylvia Pittston sat in the hall in a mammoth ironwood rocker and looked at him calmly with those great and dark eyes. The storm light fell on her cheeks in crazy halftones. She wore a shawl. The rocker made tiny squeaking noises. They looked at each other for a long, clockless moment. "You'll never catch him," she said. "You walked in the way of evil." "He came to you," the gunslinger said. "And to my bed. He spoke to me in the tongue, the high speech. He screwed you in every sense of the word." She did not flinch. "You walk an evil way, gunslinger. You stand in the shadows. You stood in the shadow of the holy place last night. Do you think I could not see you?" "Why did he heal the weed eater?" "He's an angel of God. He said so." I hope he smiled when he said it. She drew her lip back from her teeth, an unconsciously feral gesture. "He told me you would follow. He told me what to do. He said you are the Antichrist." The gunslinger shook his head. "He didn't say that." She smiled at him lazily. "He said you would want to go to bed with me. Is that true?" "Did you ever meet a man who didn't want to bed you?" "The price of my flesh would be your life, gunslinger. He has got me with child. Not his, but the child of a great king. If you invade me—" She let the lazy smile complete her thought. At the same time, she gestured with her large, huge, mountainous thighs. They stretched beneath the garment like pure marble slabs. The effect was dizzying. The gunslinger dropped his hands to the butt of his pistols. "You have a demon, woman, not a king. Yet fear not. I can remove it." The effect was instantaneous. She recoiled against the chair, and a weasel look flashed on her face. "Don't touch me! Don't come near me! You dare not touch the bride of God!" "Wanna bet?" the gunslinger said. He stepped towards her, as the gambler said when he laid down a handful of cups and wands. "Just watch me." The flesh on the huge frame quaked. Her face had become a caricature of terror, and she stabbed the sign of the eye at him with proned fingers. "The desert," the gunslinger said. "What after the desert?" "You'll never catch him! Never, never! You'll burn! He told me so!" "I'll catch him," the gunslinger said. "We both know it. What is beyond the desert?" "No!" "Answer me." "No!" He slid forward, dropped to his knees, and grabbed her thighs. Her legs looked like a vice. She made a strange, lustful kneeing noise. "The demon, then," he said. "Out it comes." "No!" He pried the legs apart and unholstered one of the guns. "No, no, no, no!" Her breath came in short, savage grunts. "Answer me." She rocked in the chair, and the floor trembled. Prayers and garbled bits of scripture flew from her lips. He ran the barrel of the gun forward. He could feel the terrified wind sucked into her lungs more than he could hear it. Her hands bat on his head. Her legs drummed against the floor. And at the same time, the huge body tried to suck the invader in. Outside, nothing watched him but the bruised and dusty sky. She screamed something high and inarticulate. "What?" "Mountains!" "What about them?" "He stops on the other side, sweet Jesus, to make his strength. Meditation, do you understand? Oh, I'm... The whole huge mountain of flesh suddenly strained forward and upward, yet he was careful not to let her secret flesh touch him. Then she seemed to wilt and grow smaller, and she wept with her hands in her lap. "So," he said, getting up. "The demon is served, huh? Get out! You've killed the child of the Crimson King, but you will be repaid. I set my watch and warrant on it. Now get out! Get out!" He stopped at the door and looked back. "No child," he said briefly. "No angel, prince, no demon. Leave me alone." And he did. 16. By the time he arrived at Kinnerly's, a queer obscurity had come over the northern horizon, and he knew it was dust. Over Tull the air was still dead quiet. Kinnerly was waiting for him on the chaff-stern stage that was the floor of his barn. "Leaving?" He grinned dejectedly at the gunslinger. "Yar." "Not before the storm?" "Ahead of it." "The wind goes faster than any man on a mule. In the open you can kill it." "I want my mule now," the gunslinger said simply. "Sure." But Kinnerly did not turn away, merely stood as if searching for something further to say, grinning his groveling, hate-filled grin, and his eyes flicked up and over the gunslinger's shoulder. The gunslinger sidestepped and turned at the same time, and the heavy stick of a stove wood that the girl Subi held swished through the air, grazing his elbow only. She lost hold of it with the force of her swing, and it clattered over the floor. In the explosive height of the loft, barn swallows took shadowed wing. The girl looked at him bovinely, her breast thrust forward with overripe grandeur at the wash-faded shirt she wore. One thumb sought the heaven of her mouth with dreamlike slowness. The gunslinger turned back to Kinnerly. Kinnerly's grin was huge. His skin was waxy yellow. His eyes rolled in their sockets. "Ah!" he began in a flame-filled whisper, and he could not continue. "The mule," the gunslinger prodded gently. Sure, Kinnerly whispered, the grin now touched with incredulity that he could still be alive. He shuffled to get it. The gunslinger moved to where he could watch the man go. The hostler brought the mule back and handed him the bridle. "You get in and tend to your sister," he said to Subi. Subi tossed her head and didn't move. The gunslinger left them there, staring at each other across the dusty, dropping-strewn floor, he with his sick grin, she with a dumb, inanimate defiance. Outside, the heat was still like a hammer. 17. He walked the mule up the center street, his boots sending up squirts of dust. His water bags, swollen with water, were strapped across the mule's back. He stopped at the tonk, but Ali was not there. The place was deserted, battened down for the storm, but still dirty from the night before. It stank of sour beer. He filled his tote sack with cornmeal, dried and roasted corn, and half of the raw hamburg in the cooler. He left 4 gold pieces stacked on the planked counter. Ali did not come down. Sheb's piano bid him a silent, yellow-toothed toodly-doo. He stepped back out and cinched the tote sack across the mule's back. There was a tight feeling in his throat. He might still avoid the trap, but the chances were small. He was, after all, the interloper. He walked past the shuttered, waiting buildings, feeling the eyes that peered through the cracks and kinks. The man in black had played God in Tull. He had spoken of the king's child, a red prince. Was it only a sense of cosmic comic, or a matter of desperation? It was a question of some importance. There was a shrill, harried scream from behind him, and the doors suddenly threw themselves open. Forms lunged. The trap was sprung. Men in long handles and men in dirty dungarees, women in slacks and faded dresses, even children tagging after their parents, and in every hand there was a chunk of wood or a knife. His reaction was automatic, instantaneous, inbred. He whirled on his heels while his hands pulled the guns from their holsters, the butts heavy and sure in his hands. It was Allie, and of course it had to be Allie, coming out at him with her face distorted, the scar a hellish purple in the lowering light. He saw that she was held hostage. The distorted, grimacing face of Sheb peered over her shoulder like a witch's familiar. She was his shield and sacrifice. He saw it all, clear and shadowless in the frozen, deathless light of the sterile calm, and heard her. "Kill me, Roland. Kill me. I said the word 19. I said... And he told me. I can't bear it." The hands were trained to give her what she wanted. He was the last of his breed, and it was not only his mouth that knew the high speech. The guns beat their heavy, autumnal music into the air. Her mouth flapped, and she sagged, and the guns fired again. The last expression on her face might have been gratitude. Sheb's head snapped back. They both fell in the dust. "They've gone to the land of 19, he thought. Whatever is there. Sticks flew through the air, rained on him. He staggered, fended them off. One with a nail pounded raggedly through it and ripped at his arm and drew blood. A man with a beard stubble and sweat-stained armpits lunged, flying at him with a dull kitchen knife held in one paw. The gunslinger shot him dead, and the man thumped into the street. His false teeth shot out, his chin struck and grinned, spitty, shiny in the dirt. "Satan!" someone was screaming. "The accursed! Bring him down!" "The interloper!" another voice cried. Sticks rained on him, a knife stuck in his boot and bounced. "The interloper! The Antichrist!" He blasted his way through the middle of them, running as the bodies fell, his hands picking the targets with ease and dreadful accuracy. 2 men and a woman went down, and he ran through the hole they left. He led them a feverish parade across the street and towards a rickety general store barber shop that faced Sheb's. He mounted the boardwalk, turned again, and fired the rest of his loads into the charging crowd. Behind them, Sheb and Allie and the others lay crucified in the dust. They never hesitated or faltered, although every shot he fired found a vital spot, and although they had probably never seen a gun. He retreated, moving his body like a dancer to avoid the flying missiles. He reloaded as he went, with a rapidity that he had also been trained into his fingers. They shuttled busily between gun belts and cylinders. The mob came up over the boardwalk, and he stepped into the general store and rammed the door closed. The large display window to the right shattered inward, and 3 men crowded through. Their faces were zealously blank, their eyes filled with a bland fire. He shot them all, and the 2 that followed them. They fell in the window, hung on the jutting shards of the glass, choking the opening. The door crashed and shuddered with their weight, and he could hear her voice. "The killer! Your souls! The cloven hoof!" The door ripped off its hinges and fell straight in, making a flat hand clap. Dust puffed up from the floor. Men, women, children charged at him. Spittle and stove wood flew. He shot his guns empty, and they fell like 9-pins in a game of points. He retreated into the barber shop, shoving over a flour barrel, rolling it at them, throwing a pan of boiling water that contained 2 nicked strains of razors. They came on, screaming with frantic incoherency. From somewhere, Sylvia Pittston exhorted them, her voice rising and falling in blind inflections. He pushed shells into hot chambers, smelling the aromas of shave and tonsure, smelling his own flesh as the calluses on the tips of his fingers singed. He went through the back door and onto the porch. The flat scrubland was at his back now, flatly denying the town that crouched against its dirty haunch. 3 men hustled around the corner, with large betrayal grins on their faces. They saw him seeing them, and the grins curled in the second before he mowed them down. A woman had followed them in, howling. She was large and fat, and known to the patrons of Sheb as Aunt Mill. The gunslinger blew her backwards, and she landed in a horrid sprawl, her skull ruckled up between her thighs. He went down the steps and walked backwards into the desert, 10 paces, 20. The back door of the barber shop flew open, and they boiled out. He caught a glimpse of Sylvia Pittston. He opened up. They fell in squats, they fell backwards, they tumbled over the railings into the dust. They cast no shadows in the deathless purple light of the day. He realized he was screaming. He had been screaming all along. His eyes felt like cracked ball bearings. His balls had drawn up against his belly. His legs were wood. His ears were iron. The guns were empty, and they boiled at him, transmogrified into an eye and a hand. And he stood, screaming and reloading, his mind far away and absent, letting his hands do their reloading trick. Could he hold up a hand, tell them that he had spent 1,000 years learning this trick and others, tell them of the guns and the blood that had blessed them? Not with his mouth, but his hands could speak their own tale. They were in throwing range as he finished reloading, and a stick struck him on the forehead and brought blood in abraded drops. 2 seconds they would be in gripping range. In the forefront he saw Kinnerly's younger daughter, perhaps 11, Subi, 2 male barflies, a whore named Amy Feldon. He let them all have it, and the ones behind them. Their bodies thumped like scarecrows. Blood and brains flew in streamers. They halted for a moment, startled, the mob's face shivering into individual, bewildered faces. A man ran in a large, screaming circle. A woman with blisters on her hands turned her head and cackled feverishly at the sky. The man whom he had first seen sitting gravely on the steps of the mercantile store made a sudden and amazing load in his pants. He had time to reload 1 gun. Then it was Sylvia Pittston running at him, waving a wooden cross in each hand. "Devil, devil, devil! Child-killing monster, destroy him! Brothers and sisters, destroy the child-killing interloper!" He put a shot into each of the cross pieces, blowing the rods to splinters, and 4 more into the woman's head. She seemed to accordion into herself and waver like a shimmer of heat. They all stared at her for a moment in tableau, while the gunslinger's fingers did their reloading trick. The tips of his fingers sizzled and burned. Neat circles were branded into the tips of each one. There were fewer of them now. He had run through them like a mower's scythe. He thought that they would break in the woman's dead, but someone threw a knife. The hilt struck him square between the eyes and knocked him over. They ran at him into reaching, vicious clot. He fired his guns empty again, lying in his own spent shells. His head hurt, and he saw large brown circles in front of his eyes. He missed with 1 shot, downed 11 with the rest. But they were on him, the ones that were left. He fired the 4 shells he had reloaded, and then they were beating him, stabbing him. He threw a pair of them off his left arm and rolled away. His hands began doing their infallible trick. He was stabbed in the shoulder, he was stabbed in the back. He was hit across the ribs. He was stabbed in the ass with what might have been a meat fork. A small boy screamed at him and made the only deep cut across the bulge of his calf. The gunslinger blew his head off. They were scattering, and he let them have it again. Back shooting now. The ones left began to retreat towards the sand-colored pitted buildings, and still the hands did their business, like over-eager dogs that wanted to do their rolling-over trick for you not once or twice but all night. And the hands were cutting them down as they ran. The last one made it as far as the steps of the barber's shop back porch, but then the gunslinger's bullet took him in the back of the head. Yup! The man cried and fell over. It was Tull's final word in the business. Silence came in, filling jagged spaces. The gunslinger was bleeding for perhaps 20 different wounds, all of them shallow except for the cut across his calf. He bounded with a strip of his shirt, and then straightened and examined his kill. They trailed in a twisting, zigzagging path from the back of the door of the barber shop to where he stood. They lay in all positions. None of them seemed to be sleeping. He followed the trail of death, counting as he went. In the general store, one man sprawled with his arms wrapped lovingly around the cracked candy jar that he had dragged down with him. He ended up where he had started, in the middle of the deserted main street. He had shot and killed 39 men, 14 women, and 5 children. He had shot and killed everyone in Tull. A sickish sweet odor came to him from the first of the dry, stirring winds. He followed it, then looked up and nodded. The decaying body of Nord was spread-eagled atop the plank roof of Shebs, crucified with wooden pegs. Mouth and eyes were open. The mark of a large and purple cloven hoof had been pressed into the skin of his grimy forehead. The gunslinger walked out of town. His mule was standing in a clump of weed about 40 yards farther along the remnant of the coach road. The gunslinger led it back to Kinnerly stable. Outside, the wind was playing a jag-time tune. He put the mule up for the time being and went back to the tonk. He found a ladder in the back shed, went up to the roof, and cut Nord loose. The body was lighter than a bag of sticks. He tumbled it down to join the common people, those who would only have to die once. Then he went back inside, ate hamburgers, and drank 3 beers while the light failed and the sand began to fly. That night he slept in the bed where he and Allie had lain. He had no dreams. The next morning the wind was gone and the sun was its usual bright and forgetful self. The bodies had gone south like tumbleweeds with the wind. At mid-morning, after he had bound all his cuts, he moved on as well. 18. He thought Brown had fallen asleep. The fire was down to no more than a spark, and the bird Zoltan had put his head under his wing. Just as he was about to get up and spread a pallet into the corner, Brown said, "There, you've told it. Do you feel better?" The gunslinger startled. "Why would I feel bad?" "You're human. You said no demon. Or did you lie?" "I didn't lie." He felt the grudging admittance in him. He liked Brown, honestly did, and he hadn't lied to the dweller in any way. "Who are you, Brown? Really, I mean." "Just me," he said, unperturbed. "Why do you have to think you're in the middle of such a mystery?" The gunslinger lit a smoke without replying. "I think you're very close to your man in black," Brown said. "Is he desperate?" "I don't know." "Are you?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. He looked at Brown with a shade of defiance. "I go where I have to go, do what I have to do." "That's good then," Brown said, and turned over and went to sleep. 19. The next morning, Brown fed him and sent him on his way. In the daylight, he was an amazing figure with his scrawny, sunburned chest, pencil-like collarbones, and loonly shock of red hair. The bird perched on his shoulder. "The mule?" the gunslinger asked. "I'll eat it," Brown said. "Okay." Brown offered his hand and the gunslinger shook it. The dweller nodded to the southeast. "Walk easy. Long days and pleasant nights." "May you have twice the number." They nodded at each other, and the man Allie had called Roland walked away, his body festooned with guns and water. He looked back once. Brown was rooting furiously at his little cornbread. The crow was perched on the low roof of the dwelling like a gargoyle. 20. The fire was down, and the stars had begun to pale off. The wind walked restlessly, told its tale to no one. The gunslinger twitched in his sleep and was still again. He dreamed a thirsty dream. In the darkness, the shape of the mountains was invisible. Any thoughts of guilt, any feelings of regret, had faded. The desert had baked them out. He found himself thinking more and more about Court, who had taught him to shoot. Court had known black from white. He stirred again and woke. He blinked at the dead fire, with its own shape superimposed over the other, more geometrical one. He was a romantic, he knew it, and he had guarded the knowledge jealously. It was a secret he had shared with only a few over the years. The girl named Susan, the girl from Majin, had been one of them. That, of course, made him think of Court again. Court was dead. They were all dead, except for him. The world had moved on. The gunslinger shouldered his gunna and moved on with it. Thank you guys for listening to part 6 of The Gunslinger. And tomorrow we start a new chapter called The Way Station. So basically, see you tomorrow, guys.